What is up? What's going on? Welcome back to the Too Tall Sports Podcast, post Super Bowl 56 edition. The LA Rams are Super Bowl champions, believe it or not. I'm sure everybody watched the game. I know I haven't given the opportunity yet to give my 2 cents on the game, which I will do. And if you want to skip ahead, I got my interview with Dr. Sarah Lepe. She is a former Cal State Fullerton volleyball player turned teacher, principal, and now she's transitioning to helping athletes in a business she calls Rebranded Athlete. That's her company on athletes transitioning out of sports into the real world. It is a huge issue, especially for athletes like myself who are trying to find their way in the real world. So great interview, fun interview with her. So if you don't want to hear me, you can skip ahead to my interview with Sarah, but let's start with the Super Bowl. I'll get there in a second, and maybe a little bit of NBA toward the end of this. We'll see what I can get in, but I'll try to keep it short and sweet for you guys. I mean, what a game for the LA Rams. This was, if you think about the playoff run that the Rams had, a lot of things had to go their way, right? Let's start with you get a home playoff game against the Arizona Cardinals, who are absolutely folding toward the end of the season. Not the same team that started 7-0, right? That team was on the way down, bad trajectory. Who knows what's going on with Kyler Murray, Cliff Kingsbury, and the whole Cardinals situation there. That's a whole story for another day. But the Rams blew them out, right? So they beat the Cardinals at home. Then they go to Tampa Bay with 4 turnovers, and they still beat Brady and Gronk and the crew in Tampa Bay. No Chris Godwin, the receiver for Tampa Bay. No Antonio Brown, who lost his mind and left the field again in dramatic fashion a couple weeks prior. So unbelievably, you beat Tom Brady. He retires. For now, it's his last game. And then you don't have to go to Lambeau and play against the Packers because the Niners randomly upset the Packers in Lambeau. So you get another home playoff game against Jimmy G, who's either hurt or just simply not that good. And then you beat them, and the safety for the Niners, Tart, drops that underthrown Stafford ball, which would have changed the game. So everything's going their way. Then you look at the Super Bowl. The Bengals had the lead with like a minute and a half to go, right? I mean, a couple stops and you got them. And the refs, I know the refs were letting them play the whole game until the end. I get that. But if you're a Bengals fan, I know there was that one play where Logan Wilson, I think the linebacker, was holding Kupp, not that much. It was ticky-tack. I'm with you there. But what about the big touchdown to T. Higgins where he ripped Jalen Ramsey's face mask, what should have been offensive pass interference? They didn't call that. I don't want to hear about the refs. Cincinnati, you barely could get the ball in the end zone. Burrow threw 1 touchdown. He was pretty pedestrian the whole day. He did get sacked 7 times because Aaron Donald was in his face the entire day. But a lot went the Rams' way. They could not run the ball at all. Cam Akers had 21 yards rushing. Stafford went Detroit Stafford for a little bit through that early interception. Then he had the one that wasn't his fault that got tipped. A lot of chaos happening, right? And they're, for some reason, disrespecting Cooper Kupp still, who had 2 touchdowns of his own. Stafford really, started to feel comfortable and get in a groove as the game went on, but the Rams could have easily lost that game, right? It was kind of a defensive struggle. And if you remember, I believe I probably told you guys this, bet responsibly, but I had the under 23-20. And I said the Bengals would probably cover, but the Rams would still win. It's exactly kind of what I thought the game would be. Just like Kansas City, the home team got out hot. And then Cincy, settled in and got the game close again, but they just couldn't put the ball in the end zone toward the end. They had plenty of chances. They had that, the coach for the Bengals, the former McVay disciple, had some bad play calls. They didn't have Joe Mixon in the game, who was actually doing pretty well in the running game for the Bengals. Didn't have him in the game toward the end. They had Samaje Perine in there. Couldn't get that big 3rd and 1 and then 4th and 1. They couldn't get the ball over for a first down. And then Aaron Donald makes the big play to save the day. It was a cool, crazy ending, right? They had all those pass interference calls on Kupp, and he was getting lit up in the end zone, but finally Stafford made it happen. And, Stafford's clutch, right? He's got all those comeback game-winning drives. Props to him, and I'll talk about if he's a Hall of Famer or not in a second. But just to put a bow on the Super Bowl, what would have happened to Sean McVay if the front office goes all in on trading for Stafford, getting OBJ, trading all those picks for Jalen Ramsey, getting Von Miller in there. You bring Eric Weddle in off the street, who was retired, to play safety because you had injuries. this was the equivalent of kind of an all-star team-ish going for it. Robert Woods got hurt. All these things had to happen for the Rams. Cooper Kupp was unbelievable, Super Bowl MVP. But if McVay loses this game, you traded Goff away for Stafford. This was the one quarterback away, competent quarterback away from winning a Super Bowl. There's a lot of what ifs, but it was just crazy. And then now McVay's 36 years old and he's got a Super Bowl. So 2 appearances, 1 Super Bowl, pretty impressive. Let me talk about Stafford for a second. There's a Richard Sherman, the former Seahawk and 49er, and he's played with some other teams as well. Pretty outspoken guy. And I normally don't agree with Richard Sherman, but he made the anti-case for Matthew Stafford, the quarterback of the Rams, to get in the Hall of Fame already. And some people are saying he's a Hall of Famer. I am with Richard Sherman on this. He is not a Hall of Famer right now. He has 1 Pro Bowl in his entire career, and I'll talk about Detroit and what they lack in a second. 1 Pro Bowl, no All-Pro selections, 0 league MVPs. He was 0-3 in the playoffs before he got to the Rams. We'll talk about the Rams stuff in a second. On paper, outside of his stat stuffing almost 50,000 passing yards, which he'll cross next year, and passing touchdowns, I get that. He'll end up top 5 in touchdown passes and passing yards. Outside of that, he's kind of a Russell Westbrook, right? Not a lot of success team-wise and not a lot of accolades outside of the stat stuffing numbers. However, the argument for him so far, the first year with a competent organization, he wins the Super Bowl. And here you go. He's got 3 playoff wins now. So I'm with you on that now, maybe 4, actually, if you count the Super Bowl. So I think at this moment, he is not a Hall of Famer. I would argue Eli Manning shouldn't be a Hall of Famer, even though he beat Belichick and Brady twice in 2 big Super Bowl games. I understand that. But Eli Manning also led the league in interceptions 3 or more times. So, and if I would compare Stafford to Eli, I'm going Stafford all day. He's a much better quarterback, consistency-wise. Stafford's got the interception bug as well. He was tied for the league in interceptions this year with Trevor Lawrence. So let's not act like Matthew Stafford is Rodgers, Brady, Mahomes all of a sudden. Josh Allen, you could argue, is, on the fringe there with those young guys, but Breeze, Roethlisberger, you could put him in that class until he won that Super Bowl. Matt Ryan has an MVP, which Richard Sherman pointed out. Stafford doesn't have an MVP. He doesn't have the accolades of a Hall of Famer, I do think with 4, 5, 6 more years with McVay and the Rams of winning seasons, Stafford will get in. His numbers are going to overwhelm you. If he gets another Super Bowl, which, hey, the NFC is wide open. We've talked about this. It's a log jam of young quarterbacks in the AFC. The NFC is wide open, and the Rams should be the favorite next year, assuming a lot of those guys come back and are intact. They make the right moves. They're going to have to pay some people. They're going to let some people go. It is what it is. It's hard to get back to the Super Bowl as look at Kansas City, but the Rams, it's wide open for them next year. No one's really competing with them outside of if Rodgers stays in Green Bay. Who knows what Tampa does? Who knows what New Orleans does? San Francisco does? Outside of that, I'm not a Dallas believer. I'm not an Arizona Cardinals believer. I think it's set up for the Rams to go again. So I know a lot of things went their way this year, but you need a little bit of luck on your side. Back to Stafford. He will be a Hall of Famer in 4 to 5, 6 more years of production wins wise. The problem with another argument I heard was the problem with football is there's really no benchmark or milestones like baseball, 500 homers, 3,000 strikeouts, 300 wins, 400 or 500 saves for closers, above 300 lifetime batting average. There are milestones and the baseball numbers are more sacred. In football, it's kind of like, well, were you the best of a generation? Were you a Super Bowl champion multiple times? How many MVPs do you have? It's not as much about the numbers per se. It's more about winning, right? It's how many wins do you have? What's your playoff record? All that stuff. So like I said, to kind of wrap that up, Stafford will be an MVP, but if his career ended today, I don't think I'd put him in right now. It's not the Hall of Very Good. It's the Hall of Fame. It's the best of the best of the best. And he's never, ask yourself, has Matthew Stafford ever been the best quarterback in the league? I don't think so. Can you really say that? Aaron Rodgers has 4 MVPs. I know he only has 1 ring. Russell Wilson only has 1 ring. I got it. I get that. But Matthew Stafford, we'll see. maybe Detroit was so bad and such a lacking organization that we're going to see just how good Matthew Stafford is in consecutive seasons. Let's see. Let's just see. We don't have to proclaim it so soon, but he will be a Hall of Famer, I believe, in 4 or 5 years of more production. So we'll go with that. Crazy. I can't believe the Sixers and the Nets in the NBA pulled off that trade. Harden wanted out. Stories started to trickle out about he didn't get along with Kyrie because they were going at it in practice. He didn't want to live in Brooklyn. He wanted to run more of an isolation pick and roll offense. Steve Nash, the coach, and Kevin Durant wanted to run a free-flowing Golden State type of offense. It started to trickle out, and now Daryl Morey, the former Houston GM, brings his boy James Harden in. He loves James Harden, and he got the deal done for Ben Simmons, who hasn't played since a year ago or, 8, 9 months, 10 months ago. I don't know what I'm getting with Ben Simmons. If I get a motivated James Harden and not the Harden that folds in the playoffs, Philly just got better. A lot of people think Brooklyn won that trade. I know they got Seth Curry, Steph's brother, and Andre Drummond, which is a big, and a first-round pick. I get all that. They may have won the long term, and who knows what Ben Simmons turns into with that organization. I don't know how good Ben Simmons is anymore. I don't even think he loves basketball. When I watch him play, I don't see any passion. But if I get a healthy James Harden with an MVP Joel Embiid, I like my chances in Philadelphia to at least get to maybe an Eastern Conference Finals. Now, of course, the only thing holding them back, this is one of my hot takes in my sports media short career, Doc Rivers, the coach, the most overrated coach in NBA history, especially over the last 25 years. I made a video on this. Check out my at Too Tall Sports podcast. Check out my TikTok about that. I made a video about how overrated Doc Rivers is. He's had so much talent, so much top-tier all-star talent, and he's done less with more. No one's done less with more than Doc Rivers since he won that title in Boston. Something for you to chew on there. Anyways, I'm going to get out on this, and I'll get to my interview with Sarah. Enjoy that. Let me know what your thoughts are. Big win for the Rams. Happy for them. Happy for the city of LA. And we'll move on from there. And it's basketball and maybe baseball season. We'll see what the lockout has to give us here. But it seems like baseball doesn't really want to help its sport, which is seemingly dying and it's shrinking by the day. So anyways, we'll get to my interview with Sarah Lepe, and we'll do it right now. What is going on? Back again with another great interview today. My guest is Dr. Sarah Lepe. She is a former Cal State Fullerton volleyball player. So we talk about a little bit of the Big West rivalry that her and I have. As most of you know, I went to Long Beach State for a year. So we talk about how good the Big West Conference actually is. She ended up becoming a principal. So we talk about that in the education system and her going from teacher to principal, which is a whole different mindset. We talk about some sports psychology stuff with Ken Ravizza, the world-renowned sports psychologist that we both worked with simultaneously in college. And we talk about life after she left sports and after her teaching credential and all that stuff. And she decided during the pandemic to make a change to create her own company called Rebranded Athlete, which helps athletes transition out of sport and into real life, which is a real conversation that everybody, including myself, deals with. What are we going to do after our uniform comes off, basically, So when the crowd stops cheering, what are you going to do? That's what Sarah does now for her career. So really great stories from her. We have some cool recruiting stories from her back in the day and the club volleyball scene and all that stuff. So a lot of fun with Sarah today. You guys are going to enjoy the conversation a lot. As always, you can follow me at Too Tall Sports Podcast. That's on Instagram. On Twitter, it's at Too Tall Sports. You can check me out on YouTube. We drop episodes every single Thursday morning at, I believe, 5 a.m. Pacific time. We got YouTube. We have Spotify, which you can check out. We have Apple Podcasts. Anywhere you get your podcast, just type in Too Tall Sports Podcast. I have to remind you all because it's my job. On Apple, if you haven't hit the 5-star yet, you go to my episodes page, scroll all the way down, hit the 5 stars. Please do so. You can also leave a review. That would help out a lot as well. And on Spotify now, they're offering star ratings. So please rate 5 stars when you go to Spotify if you're one of those people. We're also on Pandora, Amazon, Google Play, wherever you get your podcasts on there. Just type in Too Tall Sports Podcast. And with that, let's get to the interview with Sarah Lepe. All right, welcome back to the Too Tall Sports Podcast. My next guest is a doctor of education and the founder of Rebranded Athlete. She's a former volleyball player at Cal State Fullerton. So naturally, we have a Fullerton-Long Beach State rivalry that we have to talk about. She was a school principal for 6 years and also a teacher as well. She started a podcast during the pandemic, kind of like me, and she's here to tell her story about her life and all the volleyball years and everything, and now how she's helping athletes transition into real life. And she is Sarah Lepe. Thank you for being here, Sarah.
Thanks for having me, Brett. I'm excited to be here. And I know I just had you on my podcast as well. So it's great to be on yours now too.
Definitely.
The tables have turned.
yes, exactly. No, I'm glad to get your story. And, and by the way, I think our episode will be out, end of February, I think?
Yes.
Our episode on your show?
Yeah.
Okay. And what's the name of your podcast?
The Rebranded Athlete Podcast.
Rebranded Athlete. Yeah. Okay, cool. So make sure you guys check out my episode with her. And also, you do fit for a girl, the 5'11" stature on the Too Tall Sports podcast. So you fit well on this one.
I made it.
You made it. Yes. So a lot of stuff to get to with you, but I do want to start from the beginning and kind of dive into your background a little bit. You are, I guess, I still considered Southern California, originally from Oxnard, maybe toward flirting with Central, but you live in Camarillo now. Tell us about your early years growing up in Oxnard and also kind of how you got your start in volleyball.
Yeah, sure. So Oxnard, for those of you guys don't know, is we're known for strawberries. We're the strawberry capital of the world.
Okay.
It's right by the beach, but I grew up there my entire life, really. And I really didn't plan on coming back home and making this home for so long. But sure. Growing up as a kid, it was, a diverse community, definitely. I was the daughter of a school principal, so I didn't get away with much, as you can imagine.
I believe it.
Yeah. But came from a family of educators. My aunt was a big influence in my life as well. She was a PE teacher in high school. So she would get me to be the ball girl for her when I was about 5 years old with softball, and then also with volleyball as well too. So that's kind of where the whole fascination with sports first began. And then we were on something called year-round education back in the day, which means you would go to school for 3 months and you have a month off. And so the months that I had off, I spent a lot of time even at my dad's school, kind of helping out teachers. And so that's where I kind of got the flavor for education at the time. So I think those were where those roots were planted. But sports has always been something that I have been passionate about. I remember being 5 years old and being in that gym with my aunt and just being fascinated by the girls that were playing volleyball. And I knew that as soon as I was old enough, that's exactly what I wanted to do. And my dad was also my principal when I was in 4th grade.
Okay.
And it was at a brand new school site. So he was just starting the programs and different things like that. And he started up a volleyball team there. And at the time we were trying to actually make it a co-ed team. So I had, some guy friends that we were just playing. And the great part about that story is that all of that group of kids, we grew up together all the way through high school, and we all still keep in touch now. So it was that special group that kind of comes through, and even our teachers kind of noticed us, as we were going up the ranks, even into high school, and they still talk about it, like how we were such that special tight knit group. We did everything together. We're going to the beach and playing volleyball. We're at the park playing volleyball, wherever we could get our hands on a volleyball, even sometimes in our parents' living room. Don't tell them.
Of course. Right. I know. Yeah. You got to bump, set, and spike in the living room.
Yeah. We would see how far we could go before breaking something. So
okay. Exactly.
Yeah.
And just as a lot of and I have a sister who was on the volleyball circuit as she was a younger girl too. And so, the club volleyball scene has gotten insane over the last 25 years, right? You got 20 courts and volleyballs going everywhere and all age groups. And so when did you really start to take volleyball seriously to the point where you were going to play club volleyball?
So club came about when I was in middle school. And I remember there was the coach there was for Ventura West, which actually, looking at it now, we talk about club and, how elite it is, and they recruit athletes here and there and how expensive the whole program is. And this program was actually giving more back to the community. So it was very minimal cost. In fact, I found out later in life that those coaches were actually volunteers. They weren't even getting paid, just because they wanted to grow the game and, really give back to the community. So that's where it first started. I started with that club team, and then it kind of evolved to me as I started to realize, I might be onto something here, especially after we had gone up to UC Davis for the annual volleyball festival. I had a lot of recruits that were kind of already scouting me. And I remember my dad even saying, after one of our days playing up there, he's like, hey, he's like, such and such university, I couldn't tell you who it is, but, had come up to me and asked me about you. And I was like, what? And I'm like, 12, 13 years old at this time. And that wasn't really crossing my mind yet, just because I love playing the sport. But the more I started playing year after year, and it was really by the time I was a freshman in high school, that's really where my caliber of play went up. And I didn't play on varsity my first year. I had a little hiccup with that. I went on a summer vacation with a friend, missed the first 2 days of tryouts. And that's just me being a kid.
Those high school coaches, man, you can't miss anything or they crucify you.
Nothing.
Yeah.
So my punishment was to be on JV for the year, but it was really the best thing for me because it allowed me to grow into it, and it allowed me to become a leader. I was the captain on JV that year, and I really think that helped set me up to be the athlete that I was when I finally did get to the varsity team the following year. But from there, I mean, I was always a high sought after recruit in the county for a club team. So I ended up going to Channel Islands Volleyball Club with them, and, playing on their 18s at a very, young level, so to speak. But it was a great club that got me some exposure. And for the recruits to really start getting serious, it was around my sophomore year that I started to get more of those letters in the mail. And
that's pretty young to start getting letters for volleyball.
Yeah.
I think maybe now it's normal, but like back then, probably not, like you're 15, 16 years old and you're playing, at a higher level of club, and you're already getting notoriety. So how did you handle that? Or what did you think about all that?
At first it was very overwhelming because I really didn't know. And I didn't know the universities that were after me because they were out of state, right? A lot of them were with that. But then when they started trickling in, I started really like, oh my God, like this is something that I'm actually going to pursue. Like I'm actually going to be in the position where I get to choose like what school I get to go to, rather than let me put in a bunch of applications like all my other friends and hope and pray I get into, the university that I want to.
Right.
And so I started to get pretty heavily recruited that sophomore year. And then by the end of my junior year, going into senior year, I had already signed my letter of intent with Fullerton. I had gone to a recruiting trip. It was like University of Hawaii was after me, Texas, University Pacific, UC Irvine, like all these different places. And I get asked this a lot, like why Fullerton, right? Because I had all these top name schools, but it was something about that team. When I went on that recruiting trip, I just knew right away, like, this is the group of girls I'm supposed to be playing with. It was very similar to that group of kids that I had grown up with all the way through high school playing volleyball. It felt the same. And I know Fullerton at the time was like bottom of the conference. They weren't winning at all. And I knew, maybe a championship wouldn't be in my future for college sports because there was so much we were going to have to do. And at that time, this was the early 2000s. So the Big West Conference was a hot commodity for volleyball. You're talking like Misty May had just graduated
from Long Beach
State. Yeah. So you had all these top name people playing, and a lot of girls who had gone on to play for the Olympic team later on that I actually had played against my, my first few years at Fullerton. So to be in that position, to be the underdog, is something I've always strived for. Even going into Oxnard High School, they were bottom of conference when I finally was on varsity, and we ended up winning the championship that year. And Oxnard won for the next 13 consecutive years, the championships. And kind of similar story with Fullerton, even though I didn't get that Big West championship when I left, we finished upper I think we're like fourth place or something in the conference by the time I had finished. But 2 years afterwards, they finally won the Big West Championship. So
nice. So you were part of Bill, and that's kind of this is like all foreshadowing to you being a leader later in life, which is really cool. But you're a team builder and a fixer almost, right?
Exactly.
You like to come in like, here, let me put my stamp on this, whatever team it is.
Exactly.
So, which is awesome.
Chaos, whatever it is, like let's keep the team going in the direction that they need to go.
Right. You thrive in chaos. So, and I want to jump back a little bit because you have some cool stories. I want to hear about the story about the jump soles, those shoes that you got, which make you jump higher. I actually had them for a little bit because I can't jump that high. I was trying to get my vertical up, and I had bought them in high school and, working with coaches and all that stuff. But what was your story about reaching a certain doorway with the jump soles?
Oh yeah. So this is definitely a great story. So back in the day, I used to subscribe to the Volleyball magazine, right? Because that's what I wanted to do and check everything out. I remember going through it and I saw the ad for these jump soles and I was like, I'm like, I wonder if that would get my vertical higher and, see what would happen. So but even prior to that, so in the foyer of the gym at Oxnard High School, there's this huge walkway that goes through, and it's probably close to 10 feet tall for sure. And so during the guys' season, we would practice with them, and there was this guy named Eric, and he was super tall at the time in high school. He was, like 6'6", and he would just nonchalantly go up there and smack it, no problem, like every day before the guys would go out to practice. And so my coach at the time, she was always into pushing us. She was an avid runner. She, we ran way more than what we should have in volleyball. Like I probably could have tried out for the cross country team.
I was going to say, some of these coaches like to make you think that you're in track. It's like, dude, this isn't helping us. No. Like we're going to be in great shape, but it's a lot of running. Yeah. Go ahead.
We'd literally sometimes have to run 3 miles before we even started practice.
Wow.
It's like one of those things. Yeah. Well, we know it's mental toughness now is what it is, right?
Yeah. I get it in the summer, but let's be real. During the season, we don't need to do that.
Yeah. So that was her mentality. She was always pushing us to be better. And so we were sitting there getting ready for practice one day, and I saw him smacking. I'm like, all right, let me see if I can try this thing too. So I went and I approached and I missed it like big time, probably, a couple feet at least. And so my coach had seen that.
I was thinking it's basically like touching the rim almost, right?
Yes,
for basketball.
Exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm. She saw me attempt it and she's like, hey, Morrison, try it again. Morrison was my maiden name back there.
Okay.
And so I went and I approached and I went back even further that time and I ran and I missed it completely. And she looked at me and all the girls were there too. And she's like, if you can touch that, you won't ever have to run a single set of lines ever again, as long as you're here at Oxnard High School. And I looked at her, I'm like, you're gotta be kidding me, right? She's like, no, seriously. And I just told you, my coach was totally into us running. So even you talk about before practice, during practice, it was like lines for everything that we would do. So this is like the golden opportunity, right? For me to never have to run a set of lines ever again.
For sure. Those are the worst. Yeah.
So looking at that magazine and seeing that advertisement for those jump soles, and plus the girls basketball team was practicing in the small gym and they were using them all the time too. So I was fascinated with that. So what I did is during that summer, I told my parents, I really want to earn some money to buy these, what could I do? So I slaved the backyard the whole summer and scraped up enough money, finally ordered my jump soles, and I began taking them everywhere with me. I even brought them to school so that, during lunchtime, during any off time I had, I was jump roping with those jump soles. And as we all know later on, the health behind it,
yeah, it's very,
for those that bad for your knees.
Well, yeah, because there's no support on there's nothing on the heel. You're basically wearing a platform on the ball of your foot. So it elevates you to work on your calves and Achilles, and it's probably not great for you.
Right. So I probably used them for at least a month, if not more. And I was just, everywhere I was at. And then it finally got to the point where I got enough confidence and I was like, okay, coach, I think today is going to be the day. And she's like, are you sure? I'm like, yeah. And so I, got again on the line. I did, getting ready to do my approach, and I go up and I touched it. And she's like, wait, what? And she's like, no, do it again. So I had to back up and I'm getting ready and I'm going and I'm like, okay, I'm going to do it again. And I ran and I touched it. And she's like, no, you got to do it one more time. Like she still wasn't believing it.
Yeah.
So I ran back and I went up again. And sure enough, I finally hit that thing. But more than, you know, the capability of me not having to run lines, it taught me in that moment that if I put my mind to something, I was going to do it, like no matter what. So being the person that I am, even though that was like the best deal I probably could have had with a coach, I politely declined and said, you know what, I'm not going to give up running with my team. I didn't want to be that outsider. I didn't want my team to, you know, have to struggle through things and me not go with them through the process too, because that's just who I've always been. So, but that story to this day is like a legend.
Yeah, it sounds like it, man. And did you do it off 2 feet or were you 1 foot? You had to be a 2 foot jumper. Probably,
yeah, it was a
right?
it was a 2 foot approach. Yeah. To go up there.
But like a kill in volleyball.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so the height on it is very similar to a basketball rim. So I could definitely touch the top of that. Wow. So to put that in perspective.
So now what kind of outside hitter were you once you got your vertical up?
Oh man. Well, actually I was playing middle at the time.
You were playing middle. Okay.
School. Yeah. So I was unstoppable. I remember going into like the summer training and everything when we were doing summer league. And I remember we were playing against Ventura High School and I was unstoppable. Like they could not stop me. And I remember looking over at the coach from Ventura High School, and every time I would just kill the ball, she would just shake her head and laugh because there was nothing that they could do. I was jumping over the blockers.
Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So you were really coming into your own at that point. Yeah, that's when you were.
Yeah.
And you weren't always 5'11" either, right? When did you hit your growth spurt?
You know, I was pretty consistent at 5'11" through high school.
Oh, you were. So even as a freshman?
Yeah, I shot up by the time I was an 8th grader.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I stayed pretty consistent with that. But again, like growing into your body and then also getting the vertical from there. So that's what really set me aside once I got to college, because 5'11", although that sounds tall to high school,
not for college volleyball,
tall in college at all. And so to make up that, you really do have to have a good vertical jump. Otherwise, you're just going to get blocked all day long, especially those girls that are 6'6", you know, putting up that 8-foot wall.
Yeah. So now were you, well, okay, before we get to that, I want to jump something else. The other story you have about why you picked Fullerton is you really, if I remember correctly, wanted to go to UC Santa Barbara. Yes. And that was like your dream volleyball school. They had a good program. Who doesn't want to go live near at, you know, Isla Vista and Santa Barbara?
Exactly.
And you went to a camp, and then what happened to, and by the way, UCSB is in the Big West. So is Fullerton. Kind of coincidentally, you picked a rival school. So how did that all go down where you couldn't get UC Santa Barbara, but you ended up at Fullerton? Yeah.
So once I realized I had potential to go to college, I really had my eye on UCSB. First of all, I was close to home, right? So it wasn't that far. I was only about, 30 minutes from home. Love the beach. I've always loved that campus. We had gone to visits and stuff, and just really saw myself like playing for that team. And at the time, Kathy Gregory was the coach. She's well known through the volleyball community, and she's known for a reputation for being a really tough coach. And so working for, or, playing under her is one of those things where, it takes special people to be able to play for her. But I really, really wanted to play with them. And so I did everything I could. I went to a camp over the summertime. So this was, I don't remember if it was sophomore or junior year when I had gone to that camp, but at that point I had already, touched the top of that foyer, and I had the confidence and I had the hops already. And so I was doing really well at that camp. And it was to the point where her eyes were on me now, even though, I was trying to get her attention for a long time, she finally was able to see me. And they actually, during that time, invited me to play with the girls like that were there with the camp, like with the after hours stuff after everybody had left. So I was actually playing with the college girls.
So you got to scrimmage and just see if you could hang with them.
Yeah. And so I was hanging with them big time. And there was, a few of their star players that were competing against me, which was pretty cool because I was young at the time. So after that camp, she's like, I really want to stay in contact with you, this and that, I really see that you could be part of our program. Like, it really sounded hopeful. And I went home, of course, jazzed. I had my, UCSB volleyball shirt on. I was like, yes, this is the place I'm going to, come back and play and all this stuff. And then after that, I kind of got blown off a little bit, to the point where, maybe she had her eye on another recruit or whatever it was, because things happen like that. And so, of course, I was pretty crushed, just because it was one of those things where I thought that was going to be the place for me. And I remember at the time, Fullerton was also after me too. And I was kind of like, I don't want Fullerton. Like, I really want Santa Barbara. But as I started to see, okay, this may not be the right opportunity for me, that's when I started to really look at all the other schools that were reaching out, and Fullerton was very adamant. Like, they were heavily recruiting me. And I kind of see why now. I see why, because what I was bringing to the table, especially from what my college coaches were saying about me, like, just being that type of player where it's not all about me and like, it's about the team. And that's really, I think, what Fullerton needed. And so I decided to go on the recruiting trip with them. And it's a 48-hour recruiting trip. Your parents can go and all that kind of stuff. You stay with the girls in their dorms or apartments or whatever it is, and you really get to know them. And so they, at the time, were having a tournament, like a preseason at-home tournament. So there were quite a few games to watch with them. And so within the first, I would say, like 8 hours of being there, like, I already knew. Hands down. I was like,
you just got that feeling when you walked on campus.
Yeah. And, it was really the girls, number one, because it reminded me so much of that high school team, but also the fact that I could go into some place just like I did at Oxnard and really make an impact and make a difference and be part of that whole thing. And so usually when you're on these recruiting trips, you really don't commit or do anything like that until maybe the end of the trip or later, after you've had time to think about it. And I remember us going to that game that night, and I was sitting there with my parents, and then they're like, the coaches had turned around because it was still warm up time. And they're like, so what do you think so far? And I looked at them and I smiled and I said, I'm ready. My parents looked at me too, and they're like, what do you mean you're ready? I'm like, no, this is where I'm supposed to be. And I still remember to this day, like, the grin and the happiness and excitement on both the coaches' faces, because I was like the top recruit that they were trying to get that year. And for me to commit early, this is my junior year. I had my whole senior year still to go. Yeah.
And even for someone like, you're getting letters from out of state, big time schools too. So obviously you made the right choice for you and you felt it, but you're getting, what are some of the other schools that were hitting you up? Because I feel like you could have gone to a very big program around the country.
Yeah. So Texas A&M, there was UC Irvine, Pacific University, Lewis and Clark. There was Oregon State. There was also University of Hawaii. And in fact, after I had already committed to Fullerton, they had called the next week and said, hey, we'd like to fly you out, for a recruiting trip. And it was very tempting too, but I was like, you know what? I already know my heart's in the right place. And I'm the type of person, like, when I know something, I know, and that's it. Like, you don't have to like convince me, or I don't have like buyer's remorse or anything like that. Like, I just have that intuition with me when I know things are right. So yeah, it all worked out. And I think even more so for me, it was a little jab back at UCSB, just because I, didn't get into there, but I knew I'd be competing against them. And let me tell you, every year that we played against them, I just that was my moment to just try to get back at her and see. And to this day, it was my senior year when we played at UCSB. I had a great game there. And she came up afterwards, Kathy Gregory, the coach from UC Santa Barbara, and she actually apologized. She said, I'm really sorry that, we didn't scoop you up when we had the moment to, but I just want to tell you, what a remarkable player you were. And, we enjoyed competing against you all these years. So that was pretty awesome.
Wow. That's cool to hear. Yeah. Wow. That's awesome. Okay. So I do want to talk about your college career a little bit. just the first couple of years, you're new to the area. Santa Barbara was a lot closer to home. Family's close. Fullerton's not that far away, but far enough. And I just kind of want to, you're a freshman. It's a whole new level of volleyball. All that stuff. How did you adjust to college life as a student athlete?
Yeah, well, it was definitely different for sure. Number one, being away from home, from family. Dorm life is something in itself. And I think I had a little bit of a different experience just because I got injured my freshman year. So I blew out my knee pretty early on in September. And so because of that, the girls that I was really close to on the team were a year or two older than I was. So I ended up staying predominantly at their apartment a lot just because they were helping me. Like I couldn't drive. It was my right knee. So all this stuff, even though, it's a commuter college and all that, it's a small campus, but just getting around was difficult with that. But the balance of everything, I think, I really struggled at first, like finding that balance between the academic side and then also how much time was really spent with the game, because that's your full-time job. Like, let's be honest, you are there to play volleyball or whatever sport it is. And then your schooling comes secondary. That's just the nature
Plus
of it.
you got practice, you got study hall, you got you got weights in the morning, you got all kinds of stuff. It is definitely a full-time job.
Yeah. And so and then plus my challenge of being injured on top of it. So then I'm having to go to practice with everybody because that's just who I am. I want to be there to help support them. And then after that, I'm going to the training room and doing my physical therapy and things. So it was like extra time for me to try to balance all this stuff. It was hard. I'm not going to lie. That first semester, I think in particular is challenging, but it's also exciting too, just because like all this newness and, new people that you're meeting. But then I think the definitely the most challenging aspect is the travel with competing. So, you're talking about going out of state and you're trying to balance, even if you have tests or assignments to do, and trying to figure out how you're going to get that accomplished. I got really good at studying on the bus because
it's hard. You got to fit it in somehow.
Yeah. And then plus you have your social life too, so there's lots of things to balance in there. But I think the best part about it is that you have the team. And I think that's what most athletes kind of resort to, is like you predominantly hang out with your team all the time because you guys are doing everything together and you're on the same schedules and everything.
Right.
Yeah.
Now let's hear about the injury, not to revisit it too much.
No worries.
How did it happen? And then mentally, how did you handle the rehab?
Yeah. So I was competing with a senior for a starting position. So of course I'm going after every single ball. If it's going to the bleachers, I'm going after it. If it's a tight set to the net, I'm going to hit it. So we were doing a scrimmage and this was in September. So we had already had maybe 1 or 2 games for the season. And the setter had set behind her, which was a slide. And I went up and it was a sweet, sweet set. It was one of those that I'm not going to miss out on it. Plus I'm not going to not go after it because of, the position I was in. So I went and I hit the crap out of the ball. And it was just one of those sweet kills that I got. And I came down and I landed on my right leg. And I knew right away it buckled from underneath me and I fell to the ground. And I thought my knee was dislocated. Like I was in that much pain. I had never been in that much pain before or really had a big injury. And, the irony in it is that right knee, I was starting to develop some tendonitis in it, even in high school with club. And so the athletic team or athletic training team was already starting to do some things to like help with that. But that was just like, the deal breaker when I came down. And sure enough, so they got me off on the side and then, I'm crying, of course, because now they're telling me I can't play. I didn't cry when it happened. I was in a lot of pain, but they were just saying, no, you're done for right now. So they took me to the training room and I became then almost the guinea pig for all of the athletic trainer students that were in there, because the head athletic trainer did the little test on my knee to see if the ACL was gone. And sure enough, you could definitely tell the difference. And so all the other trainers came over. He's like, do you mind if they, feel? I'm like, go ahead. Like,
you're like, I'm devastated right now. This is my freshman year. And I just tore my ACL. And I believe you told me pre-show MCL.
Yeah, and MCL too.
So it's like, yeah, sure. Do what you got to do. But what's my future in volleyball?
Yeah. And so that's when I was just, kind of really thinking of that, like, oh my God, am I going to come back from this? Is this the end or whatnot? And then the head coaches, and again, this is like, early technology stuff, right? Even with cell phones, they're like, well, you're going to come down to the office and we're going to go call your parents. And I'm like, oh God, this is like the worst thing ever, to have to like call mom and dad and tell them that I'm I'm injured, So I was, at that point, I was fine. I'd shed a couple of tears because of the situation. And then I got to the office, and it was as soon as they had dialed and my mom picked up the phone, that's when I got like choked up. And then I'm just like, with my quivering voice, like, Mom. And she's like, what's the matter? I'm like, and I'm like, I'm alive. I'm okay. But, I hurt myself. I hurt my knee and I can't play. And then, she's got the waterworks going, and it's just like this whole big ordeal. But yeah, it was definitely something. But I'll have to say this though, the team at Fullerton, as far as the, training department, they were so on top of things. And within like a matter of hours, I already had an appointment with a Kaiser doctor down there, and they were like on it, because they wanted me to come back.
Right. Of course. Now, did you get surgery right away on your ACL?
No, I waited. So that was the whole thing. The doctor that I had really believed in like the prehab stuff before actually going into surgery. So, because they wanted the swelling to go down, and especially with the MCL and stuff anyways. So I didn't have surgery until November. So again, I blew it out in September. It wasn't until November that I actually had the surgery, but I was able to do pull workouts and kind of really get my mobility going. And I believe that's what allowed me to come back within 5.5 months.
Wow. Okay. So that's interesting. That's it's 2 months to wait to get surgery, which seems unusual for today's standards. I don't know, but that seems like a long wait. But it's not, you were out for the season anyway. So it's not like it really mattered that much.
Exactly. So the goal was for me to come back in, springtime, towards the end of spring.
Now, how did you come back physically after that? Did you lose a little bit of your athleticism, or did it all come back?
Yeah, I did. Definitely the hops weren't there. But I think more than anything, it's like that mind-body connection. And so it was me trying to allow myself to trust myself again, and my doctor was really good, because a lot of doctors are real quick to like have you be in a brace and always be in a brace. And I remember, with him, he's like, no, he's like, if the surgery wasn't done correctly, then you need a brace. He's like, if it's done correctly, you're fine. And so once I finally got, past that mental aspect of it, I was able to do well. But, physical therapy is what it was. And when I was in the physical therapy department, everybody in there had blown out their ACL from like skiing. So I swore to myself, I'm never going to ski in my life, because
I agree. A lot of weird collarbone breaks happen.
Oh
like
my God.
I couldn't do it either. And I'm not a big snow person, but I'm like you. It's like, I'm not going to put myself in a position to get hurt that would ruin my potential career here.
Right.
So I did want to move ahead a little bit toward the end of your Fullerton career. So, when you started to become a leader on the team, and the program was starting to change for the better, and you guys were starting to, I remember you said on another show, like you had to recruit better because Fullerton just didn't have the recruits coming in. So once you became, third, fourth, fifth year there, what was it like for you to kind of take over the leadership role of that program?
Yeah, it was definitely something I think I was ready for at the time, because I was starting to feel more like myself, and I saw it very similarly to what I did at Oxnard as well too. So it was, we had such a great group of girls, even from day one, that were a really tight knit group. I don't think I've mentioned this, but my comeback year in 2002 was like the worst year that, as far as record wise, that we ever had in the program's history.
Oh, wow. Not because of you.
No, not because of me, but coming back from that. But really, that was my favorite year. And it was my favorite year because every day that group of girls, we just came back and we did whatever we could. And as I, talked about earlier, the Big West was a hot ticket during that time. And so we're playing against older girls that are more experienced. And we were literally the underdogs. We only had 2 seniors on the team that year.
So it was a young team.
Very young. Yeah. And so that was the year I think like my leadership started to develop a little bit. And then going into my 3rd year with Fullerton, that's really where the coaches saw me as like, hey, we really want you to step into this type of leadership role and help us.
Right.
And so at that point, again, it's like gaining momentum. Like every year I was getting more and more confident with myself as far as like being in my body and also being able to compete with these, these top players that were playing all over the country.
Sure.
And so at that point, we were starting to get looked at by other players from, high schools and different things that were now starting to have interest in Fullerton. Whereas before it was like Fullerton was trying to fish everywhere. Right. And now you're having people that are interested because they're starting to see that we're starting to up and come through the conference, and we were having upsets. We were starting to upset the big teams. And that definitely gets some publicity for sure.
No, that's awesome. It's great to hear that. I want to skip ahead. You have an interesting story about your graduation, and then it was not really yet a graduation. I did enjoy that story when I heard it. So tell us about that and what happened with the whole diploma situation.
Yeah. So by my 5th year, again, I'm the older senior. So I'm already starting to kind of, veer off a little bit from feeling like I'm really part of that team. They're much younger than me. I'm starting to realize my athletic career is coming to an end. We had our senior night, all that kind of stuff. And then I still had a whole semester left at Fullerton before, the graduation line. So I had a couple of courses in my major that I was taking. Some of the other ones were kind of fun. And, as all athletes do, you go out there and you party and have a good time. And that's really what I was doing. But looking back now, I think I was really coping with the loss of my sport. And, it really in my eyes was a little bit of mild depression because I was resorting to alcoholism, just different things that weren't truly me. And as a result of that, I wasn't fully engaged in my academics like I should have been.
Gotcha.
So,
okay.
So Fullerton,
at least you admit it.
Yeah, fully admit, all that stuff. But Fullerton at the time, or all the Cal States, had just incorporated the plus-minus system for grading that last semester.
What is that?
So instead of just like solid grades, A, B, C's, and D's, it's like A+, A-, B+, B-.
Oh, so like getting a minus counts against you?
Exactly. Yeah. So, I make it all the way through. I decide I'm going to move back home and start the credential program because, quite honestly, I couldn't afford to live in Orange County anymore. It was very, very expensive.
I know it very well. Yeah, it's very expensive here.
Yeah. And so I moved back home. We had, the ceremony at Fullerton, and then at home, I had this huge party with all my friends, family, celebrating this, moment in time. And I'm like, all right, I'm getting ready for the teaching credential program in a couple of weeks here and get all that going. And so I go to the mailbox. I'm living at my parents' house at the time, and I'm going to the mailbox thinking it's going to be my official transcript because that's what I needed for the program. Right. And so I open up the mailbox, and inside is not my transcript. It's actually a letter. And I'll never forget the color of it. It was this bright yellow piece of paper. And it said, "We're sorry to inform you that your degree has not been conferred." And first of all, I was like, what do you mean conferred? Like, what does that even mean? And so make a long story short, that C- that I had in that major course was equivalent to a D. So in any major coursework you do for your major, you cannot get a failing grade of a D or an F. And so this made it past my academic counselor, my athletic counselor, like all these people, nobody caught this until the end. And I remember walking back to the house, like with that letter in my hand. I'm like, how am I going to tell my parents this? Like, what am I going to do now? You know? And so I talked to my parents, and they're just like, and, my dad being the principal, he's like, what do you mean? Like,
I'm going to talk to somebody.
Yeah, totally. So then that's where it led to next. I mean, we even made appointments with the dean down there. My parents went and everything. And they're like, no, we're sorry. This is what it is. All you have to do is just make up the class. And, we're offering summer courses here at Fullerton. And I was like, there's no way I'm coming back to Fullerton and everybody's going to see that, I didn't graduate. So
sure. You've already moved on mentally too. Like you don't want to, that ship has sailed.
Totally. So we were able to actually negotiate something for a local university out here. And so basically what I did was some work with a professor. It was like an independent study type thing. But I was, able to make it up, but it set me off course because in that time I couldn't start the credential program. I had nothing more than a high school diploma, and I had no work experience in my mind anyways, because I'm an athlete. So, so what did I do? I'd always had interest in bartending. So I said, you know what? I'm going to go to bartending school. I remember when I went to go tell my mom, she was in their community. They had like a little indoor pool type thing. And they were over there with my nieces and nephews. And I went over and I told my mom, I said, Mom, I'm going to bartending school. And she's, even to this day, you know, still tells that story. But I went and within a week got my certificate, and I ended up at a local hotel bar over here. And quite honestly, it was like the best thing that could have ever happened to me, because it gave me the ability to see that I could do things, I could lead, I could have this skill set in the workforce. And I actually ended up keeping that job for over 10 years.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I was going to, and you perfect segue. I was like, well, you got your degree in mixology instead of,
I think that's the best degree I have out of all of them, even the doctorate.
There you go. But you got life experience from that,
Yes,
right? I mean, you meet a lot of people, you know how to deal with people, you learn to work with people. And that was kind of what set you up leading to your future. So tell us how you got from being a mixologist and a bartender to now you're going to try to go teach again and rework your mindset toward, I still want to do this.
Yeah. So, you know, of course, going back to school with that. So I was bartending and then doing the credential program, and I finished, I got my master's degree as well. And then it was just all perfect timing because the recession hit in 2008. And so, you know, again, I'm blocked from doing what I want to do because they're not hiring teachers anywhere. There's like no jobs whatsoever. So that was really discouraging in itself. And so that's 2008. And I spent the next couple years just subbing where I could, getting any type of part-time teaching job. And in 2011, I finally landed a teaching position. It was a temporary contract just because, you know, they were still laying off in the process, but I'm like, hey, I'll take it, you know, whatever it is. So when I finally got into that classroom, I was like, okay, you know, this is what, you know, things are supposed to be like. But I knew from the moment that I walked into that classroom, I wasn't going to be there long. I just knew that even though I wanted to make an impact with the 35 kids that I had in my room, I was teaching 6th grade at the time.
Okay.
And I knew that this wasn't going to be like where I was going to land for the rest of my life. Like I wanted to become a leader. And so I remember already like, how can I get up to the district office? How can I, you know, do this or that? And so I moved up really quickly. So within 5 years, I went back to school again, got my master's degree once again, but this time it was in educational administration. So I needed to do that in order to get my admin credential. So there's a teaching credential and then there's an administrative credential that you have to have in order to become a principal. And so I did that, and it wasn't easy to get a job. And even though I had the teaching experience, but a lot of it was, you know, people saw me move up very quickly, which in education is something that people kind of bat their eyes at.
Of course. Like I've been here for 30 years
yes.
And this youngin is taking over.
Exactly. So this young thing's coming in trying to tell me what to do, you know, type thing. And then plus my dad. So remember I told you he was a principal. So now he's retired and he's on the board.
Okay.
And so that's also difficult too, because, you know, people see that as conflict of interest, even though he would always, you know, excuse himself anytime there was anything of me on the agenda, especially as I was trying to get these jobs and stuff. So I applied a few times for assistant principal, didn't get it the first time. But the second time I got all the way to the end. And at the time I was at a school site where they were transitioning and rolling up to being a full K-8, and it was chaos. It happened overnight. It was not something that was strategically planned. And so there were a lot of kids at that school site that were implanted from other traditional middle schools. So if you can imagine, you know, an 8th grader coming from a traditional middle school being pulled to a K-8 elementary site and being told that this is where you're going to spend your 8th grade year. So there was a lot of things. The district was reconfiguring everything at the time. So luckily enough, I ended up staying at that same school site. So, you know, it's almost like a double-edged sword as well too, because I was also colleagues, like, you know, teachers with the other teachers that were there. So we were, and then now I become, you know, their boss. So there was all that, you know, kind of process. But the great part about it is I had really good relationships with people. And that's something I'm huge on. And even carrying me from college athletics is like the relationships you build with people. That's how you're going to be able to work together and overcome and do some great things. So after 3 years there, then I applied for a principal position. And the cool part is that I ended up at the school site that my dad opened, which was the last school that he was principal at. And
Right.
then my aunt, the one that had taught me, all the ropes of volleyball back in the day, she was actually the principal at that site too. So it was really cool how all that came together, but it wasn't easy. If anything, I had to work even harder, not just because I didn't have the work experience, because I spent all my time on the volleyball court, but also because people saw me as a young leader, and people have a hard time with that.
They really totally do. It's really cool that you have like a long line of principals in your own family, and then you got to kind of come back to the school that it all started for you and your dad. And that's unusual, but really cool.
Yeah, it is. I feel lucky to, I've been part of that process. And so that's kind of where it's led me to. I started to really focus on, what other things, how else can I make an impact? Right before COVID had happened, I was doing some soul searching already, but when that happened, that really gave me an opportunity to kind of sit back. And that's where Rebranded Athlete, my athlete transition company, first originated from.
Yes, definitely. I'll ask you about that in one second, but I just want to mention this because growing up, like, I think of principals as like old grumpy women. I hate to say it, but old grumpy ladies that are just like, they're not like, I was way too young to know what was going on. And there's a lot of politics in the school system, like you were mentioning, but you were different. I've heard you talk about the fact that you would do the little things at the school, whether it's helping kids across the crosswalk or whatever, little things it would be. So you had a different mindset than I think a traditional principal would have. So maybe tell us about the difference between what you were as a principal versus maybe traditional principals.
Yeah. A lot of people like to stay in their office, and that's not how you lead a team. Yeah. I was in my office an hour before everybody got there, and I was there an hour after everybody had left. And you literally, as a principal, have 2 hours to get your work done. The other times you're hands-on with everything. And that's kind of how I've always been. And my philosophy too has always been to create that team-like environment. And that's what I felt like I did as an assistant principal. I began that process with it, but really when I had my own school site, that's when I developed that culture within the school. And that's what I was known for throughout the district. A lot of people were saying, I was really good at bringing people together and uplifting people. And yeah, as a leader, there's no job that's too small. You would see me, whatever it is, crossing the kids in the morning, if it was sweeping, mopping. And I remember people would even ask me, like, why are you doing that? Why don't you have somebody else do that? I'm like, because they're busy doing something else. Like, it's okay. And I think that's what needs to happen in order for people to really allow change to, proceed, is like, we have to take off our titles. Like, and really at the end of the day, I'm no different than the person who is supposed to be crossing the kids in the morning and who is supposed to be sweeping or mopping the floor, because we're all there for the same thing. We're there to help the kids, and everybody has a role. And that's what I always emphasize with my staff. It's like, when there's a need somewhere, just help out. We're all in this together, and we'll all figure it out. And
that's great.
Yeah. And as I left, this summer and transitioned into my own business, it was really nice to, really have that reflection. And as a leader, you don't really you're not looking for, all these, positive things or, things that people are telling you all the time. Like, you just do it because you want to do it. But when I was leaving, it was just overwhelming to hear what an impact I had, not only on the staff, but the families as well too, and how much they miss me. They call me all the time now.
Yeah. I did want to mention this, not that, and I didn't think I'd get hung up on the principal stuff, but I don't get to talk to that many of them.
Oh, it's all right.
I think you mentioned something in another interview that I heard that was, you don't think about. When you're a teacher, you have 30-ish kids and about 60 parents to deal with, right? When you're a principal, you have hundreds of kids and thousands of parents to deal with, and the district and all the administrative stuff.
Yep.
So there's a lot more on your plate. Maybe if you could speak to what that transition was like, going from in the classroom to I manage all the classrooms and the district.
Yeah. So when you're a teacher, you got your kids and you're able to just shut the door, and that's your world. And when you step up as a leader, you're responsible for everybody and everything. So it's definitely a different responsibility in that sense, because, you take it home with you. There's no way you're not always thinking about what could you do differently, or what issues that come about, because there's so many things that our kids bring to school each and every day that are out of their control. And so I think for me, learning to balance that was really how I was able to be successful, because they're long days, being a principal. I mean, for the most part, I was the first person to get to the school site, and I was always the last person to leave. And that's just the nature of the job. And if you do the job correctly and do it right, that's what it takes.
For sure. Yes.
Yeah. And so in order to really be effective, like that's why I did the team approach with a lot of things, because I'm one person. Like I can't do everything. And, you can't clone me. You can't do any of that, but I could clone myself in other ways, as far as teaching people how to do things and tapping into people's strengths, because even though I'm the leader, that doesn't mean I'm the expert, so I would lean on my staff. If I knew that they were an expert in this area, fantastic. We would love to utilize you, for this. Could you help us with it? Instead,
you got to delegate.
Yeah, exactly. Instead of that top down approach, like, everybody's on the same playing field. And just like in athletics too, not one player could hold that whole team together. Yes, sometimes it requires some players to, play a little bit higher caliber to help out the team, but everybody has their job and responsibility. And that's what I found really through working in life after sports, is that everybody has their place in the world.
Yes. And I want to jump into, before we talk about your business and kind of how it led into, I want to go back to somebody you worked with in college when you were an athlete, and someone I also worked with when I was in college as well. His name was Ken Revisa, and he is one of the world-renowned mental health coaches or sports psychologists. And he has a famous book, Heads Up Baseball, and he's got all kinds of stuff, and he is no longer with us, but you worked with him a lot. And I remember, I'll give you my favorite example of him. He would put this little toilet, a tiny toy toilet in the dugout when I was in college baseball. And he would have us like mentally and physically flush it after a bad inning or a bad at bat and be like, hey, leave that there. We're moving on. So he's got so many tools to give. What did Ken Revisa mean to you when you were an athlete?
Oh man. I would give anything to sit down and have a conversation with him now, but what a tremendous impact he had. And it's funny, the toilet thing, because he was working with our boys, the baseball guys that year, with the same thing. And he always just had a way of, even if you were in a difficult situation, like seeing the light of it and making a life example out of it. Like he all the time, like even he would come to our practices and work with us. He would be there on the sidelines when we were in the games, and he would be there afterwards to talk about, what had happened. And in particular, that 2002 year when, we were just getting it handed to us, he was there with us every step of the way. And so the life lessons that he brought and instilled in us, like I remember too, no matter what's going on in your life or whatever, leave it at the door. And he would literally, like one day had us take our backpacks and like literally like, this is all the crap that you're carrying, like leave it at the door. And when you're here, be present, and be where you need to be when you need to be there. I don't know if he told you that one.
For sure. Well, he used to also, sometimes he would kind of huddle us up and he'd be like, give me your attention for 10 seconds right now. All of your attention right now. Listen to what I'm saying. And that would allow you to tap in and focus, because you can do it. It's just getting you to that point, because a lot of plays in sports are 5 seconds long, maybe less, so give me your attention right now and focus, and then step back. And then when that next play is ready, you're in it again. So he was teaching us how to tap in and tap out at the same time.
Right. Yeah, I totally remember. And wouldn't he talk really fast too?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Try to get it all in. Yeah. But it's just amazing the things that he taught us. And I think I didn't even know it at the time, but like, visualization and meditation type stuff, because he would take us to the locker room and, have us actually visualize what was going on and allow like the tension in our body to go. And he would always refer, your sphincter tendon, like, make sure that thing's not tight, because we would always be so uptight about, things, instead of just allowing things to flow in the process.
Sure.
But he just, and I never realized at the time until later, like how impactful his words and his advice were, and how I go back to him now, as a professional. I go back to that training, and, this is years and years later. So it just goes to show you the foundations that somebody can have an impact on for your life. It's just astounding. Yeah.
Yes.
Great guy. Love his work.
Yes, definitely. Same here. Helped it, sports are very mental. So you need that side of the game. And for you now, let's talk about your transition out of, so you did all that schooling and everything's going great. You're a principal and you're like, no, you know what? I'm going to go do something else. And you decide to, you always, but I remember you saying you want to be involved in sports somehow. And you just wanted to come back to that and work with athletes. And you found, a part of life for athletes that is very well known is the transition out of sports into real life. So let's talk about Rebranded Athlete, what it is, what the messaging is, and what kind of people you're working with, how everything works.
Yeah. So I definitely did go back to that inner athlete in me. And I think I always carried that when I was a teacher and administrator as well, too. Like I was very sports oriented with my students and the staff and everybody. And it was when I was finishing my dissertation, I was actually looking at the difference between athletes and non-athletes. And I was like, okay, what can I do with this next? Like I've, spent the last 4 years of my life, like giving up my life basically to finish this doctorate degree. Like, what can I do with it besides moving up to the district office, which is what I thought was going to be. And I went back to the time that I really struggled in my life. And it was my transition out, not just because of the grades and not just because the only job I can get was a bartending position at the time, but it was letting go of that identity of who I was as an athlete. Cause I was always Sarah, the volleyball player. I didn't identify as anything else. And then when you strip that part away from you, you don't think that there's anything else waiting for you, like in life in general, because you've always been the athlete.
Right.
And I think more so for me too, because I had decided to go into education, it really wasn't going to be in the sports world anymore, unless I was part of coaching or different things like that. And I began to feel like I didn't know who I was. And so once I got clear, and this was right before COVID had happened, I started putting the plan together for it and, looking up, and there really wasn't too much work on the athletes transitioning out. Like we prepare them so much to get into sports, get into that college or university. But then at the end, we think that everything's just going to go off into the sunset and they're going to live happily ever after. But come to find out, there's really no support for athletes. It's gotten better in the last, probably 10 years or so, but it is still definitely something that needs to be a movement and needs to move forward here too.
I think a lot of people talk about it, but I'm not sure exactly who's doing it like you are, where you're actually, okay, yeah, of course, everyone knows it's tough to transition from sports, but like, what are we doing with that? So what are you, what's your mission with Rebranded Athlete?
Yeah. So what I really wanted to focus on is something to jumpstart their transition, because I know for me, if I would have had somebody or something to just tell me, hey, these are the things you can focus on, instead of like, should I go to the gym for 3 hours? Because that's all I've ever known, and being okay with letting that go. So I developed what I call the Rebranded Athlete Academy. And it's a 6-week program, which basically allows athletes to figure out who they are without their sport and have a vision for their future. So we talk about having a game plan within sports. That's exactly what we develop together. And so we look at your purpose and your potential. Actually, we start with your potential. So what skill set do you bring from the game that you can transfer over into the workforce? Because a lot of times we think we don't have any of this experience, but I was a captain. That's actually manager experience. I've been able to lead a team and do things like that. I'm coachable. Coachable is like the number one thing as somebody who hires people, that if you're coachable, I can work with you. But if you are not coachable, it's one of those things that, a lot of organizations look for. So then we focus on your purpose. What are things that you enjoy besides just the game? What are your innate strengths, things that you're good at? If you're good at organization, if you like to do public speaking, like whatever it is, and then trying to figure out, okay, what could I do with that next? And then from there, we determine your path, which is coming up with a plan. So we do SMART goals, and then we set up an action plan. And by the final week, you're actually pursuing it. And so you're beginning to do this 1-year plan that you have of how you're going to transition out and figure out this next part of your life.
That's awesome. So do you feel like within the 6 weeks, you're also kind of a therapist in the beginning? Because not saying they're lost, but how are you going to find a new passion, or how are you going to find something that you actually get excited about, So, and it's taken me a while to figure out what mine is, so it's not that easy. whether you're staying in sports, but a different part of it, or going some completely different direction. You know, a lot of athletes go into sales because they have a natural, you know, the personality for it, but also the competitive side. So, you know, early on, what do you notice throughout the 6 weeks? And then when you get to the end?
Yeah, you know, in the beginning, they're like pumped, ready to go. And then it's by week 2, like the end of week 2, that's where the overwhelm comes in, because it's like, oh my God, I really have to figure this out. But then by the end of week 3, going into week 4, that's when you start to see them turn the corner. And it is the best thing to see. Like, it reminds me of my students when they would finally like get a concept that we're talking about. Like, they can see the light and they can see that there is a vision for their future, because a lot of the athletes that come to me feel like they're lost or stuck and they don't know which direction to take. And really what it takes is just doing some inner work and having somebody to help guide you through that process.
For
so
sure.
yeah, we're definitely, you know, through some of the sessions, we become the therapist, but it's good though, because it's something that I didn't have. And that was my goal with Rebranded Athletes, to be the coach that I didn't have during that transition. And that's exactly what I want to help them with. And then after that, you know, there's opportunities for mentoring and, you know, different things to help along the way. But I really saw it as, you know, it's not a quick fix, even though it sounds really quick with the 6 weeks, but it's something to jumpstart this year-long plan is really what it's about.
Okay. So do you continue to work with them afterwards, or do you stay in contact?
I always stay in contact with my clients for sure, but some of them have decided to stay on for mentorship type program that I also offer, which it's great to see. And, you know, I've worked with some clients that came to me, not that they didn't have a plan, because like me, I had a plan of going to the teaching credential program, but they don't have the plan for that identity loss and really dealing with that in the process, because it is very similar to grief. We have to grieve it and move forward with it and learn how you repurpose and take things. And that's the whole concept behind Rebranded Athlete. You're not a former athlete. You're not a retired athlete. You're a rebranded athlete, because you're taking your skill set, the life skills, the life lessons you've learned as an athlete, and you're repurposing it into this next phase, this next season of your life.
That's awesome. That's really cool. I think that's a good way to look at it, because you're not losing that. You still are that athlete, but what can we do now with everything you've learned from being an athlete?
Exactly. You're always going to be an athlete, always, but it's just going to be in a different way.
Sure. Exactly. Now, do you have a team? You're saying you're bringing on mentors. Do you have a team built out now almost, or
not yet? I wish.
Yet. Okay. Is that, so you're just a one woman band right now?
Yeah. I have I do have a virtual assistant that helps me with the podcast and stuff like that. But yes, at the moment, the vision is to grow this into a team. As you know, I'm very team oriented, so it's very hard to do this solopreneur.
No, I got you that for sure. So where can everybody find more information on it, or look you up, or reach out to you if they want to about Rebranded Athlete, they want to help, or, you know, maybe talk about doing stuff with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a few ways. We'll start with the website first. So rebrandedathlete.com is where a lot of information is going to be housed, especially about the academy that I offer. I have 2 books that I've written as well too. One's Pivoting from the Game, which does talk about the athlete transition and your game plan out. And then the second book is Athlete to Entrepreneur, where I wrote a chapter with some other athletes talking about how they transition from being athletes to their own businesses and their own careers now too. Very nice. I'm very heavily active on Instagram, so you can follow me at Rebranded Athlete. I'm also on LinkedIn as well, under Sarah Lepe, or S Lepe is the little underscore with it. And then I also do have my own podcast too that Brett was on as well, the Rebranded Athlete podcast, where we've got episodes coming out on Mondays. And, reach out to me through email, DMs, whatever. Anything I can help and support. This is definitely, something that I want to bring more presence to, because it's bringing the awareness to the subject is the only way that we're going to be able to help athletes get to where they need to be.
That's awesome. No, that's great. Last question. Do you still watch volleyball, college volleyball on TV?
Every now and then. Every now and then. But you know what? I love watching the beach volleyball now. Man, if that was a thing when I was playing, I swear that would have been my maybe another life.
Yeah. You could have been who's the really good, well-known one?
Oh, April Ross right now.
Yeah, but the other Carrie
Walsh and Misty May. Yeah, for sure.
So beach volleyball wasn't that big when you were coming up.
No, it wasn't. Okay. So when you were done, it was either you go over to Europe or you go play AVP. And at that time I was dealing with back injuries and stuff.
So you were done.
Yeah. But I play every now and then on the beach over here with some friends.
There you go. Okay. So you're still in it. That's cool.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, she is not a doctor of medicine, but a doctor of education, former stud at Fullerton, volleyball player. She is Sarah Lepe. Thank you for being on the show with me. Great to have you on. And I will start looking at the Rebranded Athlete and send some people your way if anyone comes up.
Thank you so much. It was great to talk to you today, and thanks for having me on.
Definitely. My thanks to Sarah Lepe. Great interview with her. I really enjoyed that conversation. Hopefully you guys did as well. She has a great recall from some cool stories from her life and her volleyball career. And now she's helping athletes transition. So check out rebrandedathlete.com and all the social channels. Reach out to her on LinkedIn if you're curious about working with her or know somebody that you think should work with her. A lot of athletes need help after they're done playing. So definitely check out Rebranded Athlete and hit up Sarah. So my thanks to her again. Great interview. And I hope you guys enjoyed it just as much as I did. As always, you can follow me at Too Tall Sports Podcast. That's on Instagram. On Twitter, it's Too Tall at Too Tall Sports. Check out my YouTube channel. Subscribe, rate, and review if you can there. Like, share, comment, all that stuff on YouTube. Just type in Too Tall Sports Podcast. Head over to Apple if you're on the audio side, and on Spotify as well. They both have 5-star rating capability. If you haven't done so already, hit the 5 stars. Subscribe if you haven't already, please. That would be awesome. If you really like the show, leave a review or drop a comment. Share it with a friend. That'd be awesome. Just help us out. But I really appreciate you guys listening as always. And check out the podcast every Thursday. I drop them at 5 a.m. Pacific time, whether it's video or audio, all the platforms every Thursday morning. I have a brand new episode for you. So thank you as always for listening. Have a great day, and I'll see you next week for another great episode.